Okay, the recording has begun. Okay, so folks, the main thing that we want to talk about today are some of the key takeaways from the president's budget, and more specifically, the Department of Defense's request. We are already starting to see some areas where we will likely get our legislative asks for the Hill Surge. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. We have not seen the Navy and Marine Corps unfunded priorities list yet. We, really like to see what the sea services are actually saying. Hey, we would like this program to get a little bit more funding, to see if that's something that we obviously want to advocate for before Congress. The Coast Guard has put out their unfunded priorities list, so we've taken a look at that already. And of course, we know kind of where MARAD is at this point, and we certainly know where our top priority for MARAD is. That is still the National Maritime Transportation Strategy, which we were able to get into last year's NDAA. Unfortunately, when it comes to legislation and getting things done in Congress, getting something authorized is the first step. Getting it actually done is the second step. A lot of you might remember this from the Tanker Security Program. We worked very hard to get that authorized, but then the next year we had to get it funded. And now, luckily, it has been funded. We've got those 10 tankers ready to go. So that's an example of what we're dealing with kind of with the National Maritime Transportation Strategy. We got it in language. It's in law. So MARAD has to produce this report, but who they're going to source it out to, how much money they're going to have to pay someone to develop this report, that is still an outstanding issue, which will likely factor into this year's Hill Surge. But let's start off actually with the president's budget. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Give me just a moment. And what I want to do, I just put this in the body of an email, and so we can just kind of go through it very quickly. If you've been reading the weekly newsletter that we put out, some of this is already going to be stuff that you know, but I just want to cover it again very quickly. First and foremost, let's talk about what the president's budget is. It's not legally binding. It is really an exercise in messaging. It is what the president and the various agencies within the administration would like to see from the budget. However, Congress is obviously going to take a look at this and say yes or no to various items within that budget. And of course, with a divided Congress, there's going to be a whole lot of no's to some of the things that the president has put out. On the topic of messaging, this particular budget, and this was something that I think I put in the newsletter about 2 weeks ago, a number of political pundits have speculated that this is less of a budget and more of a framework for the president's 2024 reelection campaign. There's a lot of domestic spending priorities, things that are obviously popular with the president's base, things of that nature. Also, pay-fors in the form of higher tax programs for wealthier Americans, big companies, things like that, kind of a populist messaging around this. So long story short, this budget is not going to make it through Congress, not looking anything like how it looks coming out of the president's office, coming out of the White House. This is essentially dead on arrival going into Congress. But again, this could be really more of a framework for what the president is going to be promising going into 2024, essentially saying, hey, voters, if you like what's in this budget, you're going to have to give me another 4 years to make it happen. But in terms of what we are dealing with this year in our Hill Surge, the president's budget is giving us a little bit of an insight, but I think a lot of it's going to be changed when Congress really starts doing the work to put together their budget. So with that being said, let's take a look at what the Department of Defense has requested. So first and foremost, we have an $842 billion top line. This is a 3.2% increase from last year. Now, two kind of talking points that have come up among supporters of the military and also folks that want to criticize the president and criticize the party. Two things. One is this obviously doesn't match inflation, which is a problem. Second thing, China's military budget is growing at a rate of about 7%, while ours is growing at about 3.2%. I don't know if we necessarily need to peg our military spending directly to China, but that is a talking point that you're going to hear pretty often. I think as you go into some of your meetings during the Hill Surge, you'll hear that repeated. So just be aware of that. The Navy top line is $255.8 billion. That's up $11 billion from last year. This is pretty significant because the Navy got this plus up already in the budget, whereas I believe, and Scott's son, please correct me if I'm wrong, the Army and I think the Air Force did not get the same type of plus up, which shows you that there is an understanding that we need that forward presence provided by our naval fleet in order to stave off great power competition or to win in the event of a conflict with a great power competitor. So it is very significant to see that $11 billion in terms of the overall, 842 billion from the DoD request for the 6.9 trillion in the president's budget. 11 billion might not sound like much, but the fact that the Navy got it and some other services did not really does say that there is an understanding within the Pentagon that we need to have these strong maritime forces in this new era of great power competition with nations like Russia and China. Let me actually go back for one moment to the $842 billion top line. It is not inconceivable at all that Congress will plus that up considerably. Bear in mind that last year, Congress plussed up the overall top line for defense spending by Scott, again, if I'm wrong, let me know, 40 or 50 billion, some very, very large number. So that could very well happen again this year in terms of the DoD top line. Okay, a lot of money for research. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The only changes there is that it was both the Air Force and the Navy got the plus up. Army only got 185 billion, and Air Force actually got the most. They got 259 billion, and the Navy got 255.8. Now the key here is this summer, General Milley is retiring as the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, and the expected person that's going to come in is the current Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General C.Q. Brown. And the Air Force, if you think that the Navy's got problems with a recapitalization, the Air Force is in even worse shape, and they've also got the U.S. Space Force that they're dealing with. And so a lot of their stuff is very high-end technology and also high ticket items, very expensive. And to recapitalize a lot of the aircraft that they're going to do, my guess is that General Brown, he's going to get a honeymoon, and he's going to get a couple of his asks, and he'll be turning over, I believe, I think he turns over in June. And then also the other big turnover is General Berger, who's the current Commandant of the Marine Corps, is retiring in July. And so that will feed into some of your later stuff there. But there is an acknowledgement that the traditional one-third split of the defense pie is kind of gone away. And it's also an acknowledgement of the increasing importance of the Indo-PACOM area. There's also a very large amount, $11 billion in the, or what do they call it, the PDI, Pacific Deterrence Initiative.
Thank you, Scott. Yes, all very good points. And certainly those turnovers are going to affect our work to a certain extent. We certainly need to see what happens in terms of the Marine Corps top priorities moving forward when Commandant Berger does change out. So very good points there. Again, research and development, we're seeing a lot of money going into that. For the Navy, you see that 26.9 billion. Down here towards the bottom, I think I wrote in the total number for the whole thing. Yeah, for the entire Department of Defense, 145 billion. That is a lot of money going into everything from hypersonic weapons to artificial intelligence, things of that nature. So you can also, once again, get an idea of some of the Pentagon's big priorities in terms of those emerging technologies. Let's talk a little bit about shipbuilding. Obviously, that's always a big part of our Hill Surge and a big part of our advocacy efforts across the board. Top line on shipbuilding was 32.8 billion. Actually, I think that's just a slight increase from 2023. However, it does cover the 9 Battle Force ships that the Navy is looking to procure starting next year. These include some of the ships that you see here: Columbia class, Virginia class, 2 Arleigh Burke destroyers, 2 frigates, an oiler, and a submarine tender replacement. Now, bear in mind, at the same time, we are decommissioning, or according to this request, they have asked to decommission 11 ships. That's 8 ahead of their service life. So 3 of them are kind of one-for-one swaps. Scott, I think you and I had gone over this before. That would be those 2 cruisers and 1 attack submarine. They are actually going to be swapped out. But then there are 8 other vessels, which are just the Navy would like to no longer pay to maintain them and would like to decommission them. And those include these 3 amphibious dock landing ships, 3 cruisers, and 2 littoral combat ships. There's some money for PSYOP, 2.7 billion, 13.9 billion for ship maintenance, $647 million allocated for investment in the submarine industrial base. Next up, you'll see in caps, all caps, always kind of an alert there. No procurement of new amphibious vessels in this particular budget request. That conversation has already spilled out into the public a little bit. Right after the budget came out, both CNO and Commandant Berger, I believe, participated in the Macalise Defense Forum. CNO was specifically asked, CNO Gilday was asked about these amphibious vessels, and his response from the text that I've seen was about cost, which is interesting because he didn't say, specifically the reason was it doesn't fit into a strategic plan, or we don't know how many we're going to use or how many we're going to need, or so on and so forth. Those things have been said in the past, but his specific comments right after the budget was released, or these specific line items was released, was more along the lines of just cost, which might be a way of saying, hey, Congress, it's up to you to get these things into the budget. Okay, cost is the primary driver, so you guys need to come up with the money. Although, there is also the concept again of evaluating what exactly the need for the amphibious vessels will be in the overall mission. The Marine Corps obviously feels very strongly that they need these 31 amphibs. They have said repeatedly, 31 is the minimum, the absolute minimum. We need to have those 31 amphibs. And the Commandant, Commandant Berger, also stated, right after CNO essentially, that he thinks that the cost is not as significant, or that CNO is not taking into account certain aspects of the cost. The cost has been brought down for the production of each amphib. If you take into account inflation and things of that nature, the cost is actually not so bad, so on and so forth. So this is a disagreement, which is kind of in public. It's still very genial, very cordial. It's not kind of a visceral disagreement, but it's public. CNO is saying the cost is too high, and Commandant Berger saying, I don't think it is. So this is something that obviously we are looking at in terms of the Hill Surge, and we will let you guys kind of know, as we're checking with our sources and everything, what we want to do moving forward. So overall, this shipbuilding plan would result in a deployable battle force of 293 ships in fiscal year 2024. You can see end strength here, not changing that much for active duty or reserve, whether it's the Navy or the Marine Corps. I think the largest change here is active duty Marine Corps goes down to 172,300 from 177,000. The other changes here are not quite as significant. Well, active duty Navy down to 347 from 354. So that gives you an idea of end strength. All service members are getting a pay raise of 5.2%. That's the largest pay raise, I believe, since 2002 for active duty service members. That being said, of course, inflation takes a big bite out of everything, so keep that in mind. And as Scott mentioned, the Pacific Deterrence Initiative getting a lot of attention, getting some additional funding as that region just becomes increasingly important to all things American security and American interests. Let me mention very quickly just Coast Guard and MARAD. So Coast Guard, the ONS budget, something that we often include in our Hill Surge. It is the request is 10.2 billion. That is up from the 9.7 billion enacted in 2023. So if you just look at those numbers, that is a little more than the 5% increase that we usually ask for. But of course, there's always a but. That does not account for inflation. We like to see 5% increase after accounting for inflation, and this number obviously does not do that. There is funding to procure an additional commercially available polar icebreaker, and 144 million to address the backlog in shoreside infrastructure. I'm reaching out to our friends in the Coast Guard Office of Legislative Affairs to get an idea of what that backlog looks like at this point. We've used this kind of 2 billion number. I think for a couple of years now, there's a $2 billion backlog. But I think that last year there was some significant funding allocated to address that backlog. So I don't think it's at 2 billion now. We'll have to double check what that is. Maritime Administration, relatively unchanged, except for a decrease in money for the State Maritime Academy operations. And that's something that we're looking at right now. And then, of course, that National Maritime Transportation Strategy, something that we are still very, very concerned about. We want to make sure that that is implemented correctly. In fact, actually, there's going to be a committee hearing tomorrow, I believe, with the MARAD administrator. And I've already reached out to some of the staff members that are going to be involved with some of the folks in the relevant committee to see if they can ask about that. And they've assured me that they will bring that up and make it something that they want to discuss as the, moving forward with the National Maritime Transportation Strategy. With all of that being said, let me go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And I will ask very quickly if Scott, I hate to pick you out again, but is there anything that I'm missing or anything that you'd like to add?
No, you covered it really, really well. One of the things to know with, as these budgets are, they're all symbiotic and they all play on each other. The manpower issue is important, and those of you guys who were in the Navy before and worked with personnel, that's a yearly bill. So they're trying to drop 7,000 people. But what they've done is they've added that in. If they get their eight ships decom, they're getting part of that decrease in manpower by not remanning those ships. And so if Congress says, aha, no, you cannot, last year they tried to decom some ships and Congress went to bed and said, no, you can't decom them. And there may be an idea there where the Congress will say, you can't decom the 3 Whidbey Island class LSDs, which would then, they would have to keep that manpower and still fund that manpower, which is a cut out of the manpower funding overall in time. So they're kind of, you have to be careful when you see the manpower cut, but it's being put with the loss of ships. They're just not going to add more ships. They're just going to keep bringing everything down. And so that becomes an issue there. And last year also, as you kind of alluded to, the Navy kind of played a coy game with the Congress by putting their stuff in the unfunded list and saying, well, this is what my budget is. You want me to stay within my lines. If you want to have me do more ships, then you have to fund it above the line. That's what they're probably hoping on. It's kind of a funny game to play there, because if Congress says, yeah, sure, if that's what you want, fine, here you go. And then you're like, ah! But, that's all I have to add.
Well, so as Scott mentioned, it's a little bit of a game of chicken. And in the past, the Navy has been able to say, hey, we only put this stuff, this is all the budget that we've got. Here's all this other stuff we'd like to have, but you know what, Congress, it's up to you. And in the past, Congress said, okay, all right, what do you guys really need? You need these extra things, we'll plus up the budget. This year, there's no guarantee that's going to happen. So the Navy might literally just get what it asked for and not get these other unfunded items. So again, that's somewhere where we're going to have to come in as advocates and try and convince Congress about some of these other items that are necessary. One last thing I want to mention, not necessarily.
Luke,
yeah.
Luke, and one more thing here that we just got wind of, and I think you saw that too, is Carlos del Toro kind of inkled a little bit here. The 30-year shipbuilding plan, which is a congressional mandate to the Navy, is getting ready to come out here shortly, probably within the month or within the next couple of weeks. The problem is he's already inkled that he's going to do the free option plan again, and that is going to significantly upset Congress because they don't like that. They want to be told a number, and then and then people on various sides of the aisle will use that number either to whack people over the head or to tell people that it's not enough. And so the fact that he's going to play the game again with here's three options, you guys pick one, you guys Congress, you're the ones with the first, that's going to upset people in Congress. And that's, again, you're playing a game and the stakes are very, very high.
Absolutely agree. Last time the shipbuilding plan was referred to in Washington, D.C. as a choose your own adventure shipbuilding plan. Whichever page you want to turn to, you go ahead and do that. There's three options instead of clear guidance. As Scott has said, here's what we need. That's not the plan that's coming out. It's here's three different options. In Congress, you kind of take a look and choose your own adventure. One other quick thing I wanted to mention, because it's not a budgetary item, but it's something that's very, very important to us. We've been fighting for this thing for years and have not got it across the finish line. We're going to make another big push for it this year is pay parity for the Coast Guard, just in case anyone's not familiar with this. In the event of a government shutdown, which unfortunately this year is quite likely, in the event of a government shutdown, there is kind of a carve out for military service members that they continue to receive their paycheck on time, on schedule, because of course they're out there risking their lives for their country. And so even though other government workers working in various agencies and whatnot might get furloughed or not get their paycheck or whatever, if you are in a military service, you will still get paid. Of course, the Coast Guard falls under Department of Homeland Security, so they are not privy to this particular carve out. This is especially distressing for the Coast Guard because they are not sitting in garrison. They are always out there conducting drug interdiction efforts, countering human smuggling, responding to humanitarian disasters, all of these kinds of things. They are out there every day, working hard, risking their lives. And during the last government shutdown, they went about a month without getting paid. Imagine you're out there doing this kind of dangerous work, and in the back of your mind, you're wondering, how am I going to pay rent this month? How am I going to get my kid school clothes or whatever the case may be? And of course, what does that do for retention? You think somebody wants to stay in an organization when they had to work a month without getting a paycheck? So this is something that we're trying to push for, making sure that the Coast Guard also falls under that particular carve out. Whenever there is a lapse in government funding or a government shutdown, whatever the case may be, they continue to get paid regularly, just like military service members do. So that is something that we will likely include in our Hill Surge asks. And of course, we always support Sea Cadets and Young Marines. That'll probably appear in there also. On that note, again, we're waiting on those unfunded priorities lists, but in time for next week's training, I think we're going to try and put together some of the asks that we already have. I think we probably have maybe 50, 60% of them, a pretty clear idea of what we're going to be asking for. So we'll start putting together some of those materials. Obviously, you will have everything that you had last time around. So that includes not only the PowerPoint presentation, the issue briefs, the question and answer sheets, a full spreadsheet with all of your members of Congress, along with their scheduler information, their legislative assistant dealing with military matters, their email and information. And then this year, we also want to give you a column with the district director, so that if you're able to meet with them in district, that's something that we're kind of pushing this year, you'll have that information as well. So again, every region should have a full spreadsheet with all your members of Congress, their scheduler, their military legislative assistant, and their district director. And those members of Congress will be divided by tiers, 3 tiers. I know this sounds complicated, but it'll make sense when you see the spreadsheet. Tier 1 is the chair and ranking member on the committees that oversee the sea services. Tier 2 is just anyone that sits on those committees, even if they don't have a leadership role. Tier 3 is everybody else. So folks that just happen to sit on, whatever, the Judiciary Committee or something like that, they're in Tier 3. Their work is important, but it's not necessarily Navy League related. Tier 2 would be someone that sits on the House Armed Services Committee, but doesn't have a leadership position. Tier 1 would be, say, the chair of the House Armed Services Committee. So that's how we kind of divide them up among the MOCs. I will pause there and see if anyone has any questions. Marilyn, let's go ahead and.
Not so much a question, but in arguing year after year for Coast Guard pay parity, I think it'd be very important to point out that they are an integral part of defense. After all, defense readiness is within its statutory mission set. So aside from all the good things that you mentioned about their deserving to be paid, they are part of defense.
I agree with that, and I think that messaging will work in the House. I also think messaging related to kind of border security. Remember, whether it comes to protecting the United States from illegal drugs or enforcing, America's immigration policies, whatever the case may be, I think for the new majority in the House, these are messages that they might respond to. And so the Coast Guard is integral in those efforts as well. Defense, immigration, countering drug trafficking, all these very, very important things. So I do think that we can frame this in a way that they will see the importance of the Coast Guard and understand how important it is to get them this pay parity. But I certainly agree with that, Marilyn. Scott, did you have a comment?
Yeah, the one real quick one is, are we deciding whether or not we're going to advocate for an increase in the munitions or weapons buys? Because between last year and this year, even though the Navy is requesting about $2 billion more in weapons, everybody knows that that's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. All of the weapons stock has been depleted significantly because of the support to Ukraine. And Ukraine's going to cost, who knows, billions and billions of dollars this next year, probably. And our stockpiles are significantly low, almost to the point, I think, that we're getting into a high-risk area.
So I know that this is a big topic up on Capitol Hill, so it's not something that they're not aware of. For the Hill Surge, let me see how to say this correctly. I really want us to try and condense our asks this year. Last year, I think we did a great job, but we did have a lot of asks in one presentation. I'm going to see if we can kind of pare that back a little bit. Munitions are very, very important. And this is something that we'll be discussing with the steering committee. Scott, you're part of that as well when we decide what our final asks are going to be. Obviously, there's no opposition from any of us to bringing up the issue of munitions. I just wonder, again, I think folks on the Hill are very aware of the munitions issue. So I don't know. It could end up being part of our Hill Surge. Yes, my question or my statement at this point is maybe. I don't know. I do think it's something that they are tracking. I don't think they're unaware of that issue right now, but it's important enough that maybe it will be one of our major asks.
Yeah, and another operational question to add on to what Scott said. In that brief purview of the budget for the Navy, I saw LCS is still in there. They're looking to acquire. After all the controversy over the LCS, are we going to have, we may be questioned by members. I know we were last year of Congress about what good is the LCS program. I'll leave it up to you to produce a slide to help us justify why it's in the budget, if it is in the budget.
Right. So, yeah, we did include that last year. I think we might still have a one-page issue brief on that. And essentially, we said a couple things. One, these LCSs are doing important missions in South America and in the Pacific and places that are a little bit less contested. Right. They might not be the crown jewel of our naval forces, but they are doing real missions. If you take them away, who's going to do those missions? Especially as China and Russia are trying to make inroads in places like South America, it's very important for us to have that presence there, which the LCS currently provides. So that's something, but we'll come back to that and we'll certainly make sure that you have the information that you need for that. Rich, I want to make sure that we don't miss you. I can see you've got your hand up.
Yes. First question is the Coast Guard icebreaker that you mentioned. You mentioned that they're
commercially, right?
Or
are we chartering a commercial icebreaker then?
Yes.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Rich.
Is that going to be purchased from abroad, or will it be purchased new, or will it be? I don't think there are any existing icebreakers in the U.S. fleet. Any edification that you could add to that?
So that's something I'm actually going to have to look into. I'm not 100% positive on that, Rich. So let me get an answer for you on that.
All right, thank you.
Did you have a second question, Rich?
Well, it was just to back up what was said earlier about the Coast Guard being integral to defense. I mean, I know there are Coast Guard units in Guantanamo Bay that are helping there. There are Coast Guard units in the Gulf, the Arabian Gulf area that are on missions there as well. So it's not just drug interdiction. There's active support directly for the military. Over. Thank you.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct about that. And in fact, the Coast Guard is, at least at this point, kind of the tip of the spear with our Arctic operations. That's why we need those icebreakers so badly. We are asking for the Coast Guard to really step up their mission set in the Arctic. So yeah, I mean, we tend to think about, and I'm guilty of this too, we tend to think about drug interdiction, the things I just mentioned, human smuggling, responding to extreme weather events, but they are training with our allies in the Pacific. They are in the Arabian Gulf, as you mentioned, and they are increasingly in the Arctic as well. So some of the real hot spots around the world, the Coast Guard has a real presence there. Any other questions at this point?
Oh,
Yes, Marilyn.
you had mentioned that there'd be some discussion with Admiral Phillips soon, the MARAD administrator.
Yes, correct. I believe there is a hearing tomorrow with the subcommittee on Coast Guard and maritime security and maritime transportation.
Is John Kaskin going to be there?
No, I don't think he will be there. I think he's still out of
Is
the
there-
country at the moment. But I've reached out to, again, relevant staffers that work with the members of that committee, and hopefully we will get our questions kind of brought up during that hearing. So I'll have to check back in on it later. I'm going to a congressional breakfast tomorrow morning, and then we've got some stuff for Sea Air Space. But I will probably rewatch that hearing in the afternoon and see if they covered the National Maritime Transportation Strategy.
A little bit more to that. The design and build of 10 new ships was a big win last year. Could somebody follow up on that as far as where they are on that authorization?
Let me see, because I can connect with those staff members again and see what the latest is.
Hey, Luke, there's one other issue with the submarine issue that's going to come on in another year or two. I don't know if people are really familiar with this AUKUS stuff. I think those over on the West Coast may be more familiar with it than those in Hawaii. AUKUS is the Australian, UK, and US kind of agreement now that they want to build 5 submarines for the Australian Navy. They're going to get a couple of existing submarines from the United States, but they want to build 5 more. And if we're already, as I talked to you the other day, it's a capacity issue in the shipyards right now. We're looking good building 2 SSN per year right now, and that's very good. But if we have to plus up to 3 per year, I'm not sure we can do it. At the same time, what if they say, well, one of the ships now is going to be one of the Australian ships? Then that starts to decrement our planning for getting our submarine fleet back up to where it is. And that is by far the most survivable platform in Indo-PACOM type of conflict. So this is one of those things to watch. Everybody's all liquored up right now about AUKUS, and they want to all do this, and they want to support Australia and the UK, but it comes with a price.
No, that's a very good point. And as far as I'm aware at this point, we don't know if those, I think it's 3 to 5, as Scott said, I think it's 5 of these submarines that will be providing to the Australians. If those come out of the the current submarine schedule that we have, or if we are expecting to expand capacity specifically to build these 5 additional submarines. I mean, if I had to take a wild guess, I'd say it's probably coming out of what we're already set to produce, but we don't know that for certain. If that's the case, then that's a problem, because as Scott pointed out, that means that we don't have the fleet that we expected to have, that we plan to have, and that we need to have. So that's another thing. This AUKUS agreement does kind of throw everything a little bit off balance because this is 5 more submarines that have just been entered into the equation, and we're not entirely sure how they get produced, when they get produced, where they get produced, so on and so forth. So AUKUS is definitely something that's going to be brought up during our meetings. We'll make sure that everyone knows as much as you can. But again, at this point, we know how many submarines are supposed to be part of this deal, but I don't think anyone on Capitol Hill or elsewhere knows at this moment exactly what the plan is for producing and providing those submarines. So that's something to look into as well. So again, next week we'll start doing our training. We should have a bunch of our asks already, so we can start going through kind of an initial draft of what the presentation will look like. Hopefully we'll have that spreadsheet for you with the members of Congress already, so we can start talking about that a little bit and how you can start setting up meetings with them. Then we have Sea Air Space, which is our big thing, of course. Everything kind of stops for that. When we come back from Sea Air Space, I think that our regularly scheduled Legislative Affairs Committee meeting, the 3rd Thursday in April, will instead be kind of a launch event / final training. The week before, we'll be sending stuff out. We'll be communicating with all the RVPs and other folks to make sure everyone has what they need and knows, what they're working on. But then that following Tuesday, we'll have kind of a launch event / a final rehearsal of the actual PowerPoint presentation that we're going to be using. Again, it's our goal to not make this complicated this year, to try and condense our asks to make sure that we're only hitting those key topics. We want it to be a little bit shorter than last year's presentation, so hopefully this will not be a difficult one. Still, it will be a very important one. So we'll be going over that just generally over the next couple weeks, with kind of that third Tuesday in April being, at this point, probably our launch date for the Hill Surge. With that being said, did anyone have any kind of final questions, comments, or closing thoughts?
Just one more thing, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Since you brought up the point that the risk of a continuing resolution is very real, at the last committee meeting, we talked about the financial costs of continuing resolutions. And even though Chairman Offit felt that the cost may, relative to the entire budget, be insignificant, I remembered the figure as being in the neighborhood of $4 billion. Well, that can buy us an Arleigh Burke destroyer, can it?
Well, so this is something John Kaskin actually, after we had that conversation, sent out the latest article that actually calculated what a continuing resolution costs the military. And I think that's a very valid point to make. I mean, we've got folks in Congress who want to save money, who want to, cut the budget and so on and so forth. But at the same time, nobody wants to, deny the United States the type of security that we need. I think anything like that, where we can say, listen, here's one way that you save us $4 or $5 billion. That makes a difference. That's a big number. I mean, even when Congress is dealing with, trillions of dollars, $4 or $5 billion, that means something. And like you said, think about what that could go towards rather than just being wasted. So I think
we need to tell them that China does not have continuing resolutions.
Yeah, that's for sure.
They're going
Yeah,
full bore. They don't have continuing resolutions.
That's true. China does not have continuing
That's right.
resolutions. As Xi Jinping goes into his 10th, 20th, 30th
Right.
term as president, he doesn't
continuing.
have to worry about continuing resolutions. That is true. So
That's
we
that's
can make
what
that.
we're that's what we're fighting against. Exactly.
Well, that's true. And actually, I mean, Marilyn, you do make a good point. Look, our adversaries are out there every day trying to catch up to us and surpass us. I mean, kind of the silliness that we have to deal with, in Congress just over these budget battles. Let's keep our eye on the prize. This is a serious issue of national security, and so it should be treated that way. So yeah, great point, Marilyn. Anybody else? Closing thoughts before we sign off for the day? Okay. Yeah, Steve.
Can you catch any of those vendors, like for munitions and for the submarine contractors at Sea Air Space?
I would assume that we will have some of them there. So if I get a chance to get down to the exhibit floor, I'll probably talk to them a little bit about, you
Yeah,
know, what
Boeing.
are their
You want
concerns.
to talk to Boeing.
Sure. Scott, you'll be at Sea Space, right? Okay. So yeah, Scott, you and I can talk maybe about doing just what Steve said, connecting with some of these folks right there on the exhibit floor.
Munitions on the floor would be Lockheed and Martin
Northrop.
and Northrop. Yeah.
Yeah, I had some,
Sail Drone will be there. They're there every year. We want to talk with them.
Okay.
I suspect that at the major,
Right.
meeting there where they had, Admiral Gilday and the other one sitting up on the top of the stadium, of the dais there, that they're going to get grilled pretty hard from the audience. I think there's a lot of people that have a lot of questions. And, I think it's going to get sporty.
And Scott, that might be another opportunity to kind of feel the temperature on how much munitions are being discussed. If that's the top, area for questions during Sea Space, then I think we'll know that, I don't think anyone's not aware of this, which again could factor into whether or not we decide to bring it up as part of our Hill Surge. But we'll kind of keep working on that. Steve, are you coming out to Sea Space?
No, I will not be able to. I was there when I was on active duty, but no, I didn't get to go there while I was in the previous reserve. My other point is that I'm sorry to say that three out of the 4 new representatives in Oregon are not on committees. So, I think that's because we're so far away from the flagpole, but I think it's probably in nature of there are also women as well that were elected to Oregon to Congress.
Well, then that if they're not on committees, that would certainly put them in tier 3. So that's a couple of folks that if you get the time, you can certainly reach out to them. If you don't have the time, then don't feel too bad about it. So it makes your job maybe a little bit easier.
But it means a lot of farming. So we're going to farm them for the next 2 years and prep them for any committees that they're going to get into, maybe.
Excellent. Hey, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. And I'm sure they could use the use some mentorship, so that might help.
We'll go at it from that point out here in the Northwest.
Sounds good, Steve. Rich, just want to double check that you didn't have another question. I see that your hand is still raised.
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Okay, folks. Well, with that being said, we'll go ahead and sign off today. I will see you guys next Tuesday when we'll start going over our actual grassroots training for the Hill Surge. And I look forward to seeing all of you then. Have a great week. Be safe, be healthy, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
We'll see you, Lou. See you, everybody.
Bye.
See you later.
Bye-bye.